The Glass Menagerie, Tennessee Williams. I'm going to read the foreword. It's The Catastrophe of Success, and it's just a couple of pages, but I want to kind of lead into the story by this. This essay was first published in the New York Times, later reprinted in Story, and is now included as an introduction in this edition of the play. This winter marked the third anniversary of the Chicago opening of the Glass Menagerie, an event that terminated one part of my life and began another about as different in all external circumstances as could well be imagined. I was snatched out of virtual oblivion and thrust into sudden prominence, and from the precarious tenancy of furnished rooms about the country, I was removed to a suite in a first-class Manhattan hotel. My experience was not unique. Success has often come that abruptly into the lives of Americans. The Cinderella story is our favorite national myth, the cornerstone of the film industry, if not of the democracy itself. I have seen it enacted on the screen so often that I was now inclined to yawn at it, not with disbelief, but with an attitude of who cares? Anyone with such beautiful teeth and hair as the screen protagonist of such a story was bound to have a good time one way or another, and you could bet your bottom dollar and all the tea in China that one would not be caught dead or alive at any meeting involving a social conscience. No, my experience was not exceptional, but neither was it quite ordinary. And if you are willing to accept the somewhat eclectic proposition that I had not been writing with such an experience in mind, and many people are not willing to believe that a playwright is interested in anything but popular success, there may be some point in comparing the two estates. The sort of life that I had had previously to this popular success was one that required endurance, a life of clawing and scratching along a sheer surface and holding on tight with raw fingers to every inch of rock higher than the one caught hold of before. But it was a good life because it was the sort of life for which the human organism is created. I was not aware of how much vital energy had gone into this struggle until the struggle was removed. I was out on a level plateau with my arms still thrashing and my lungs still grabbing at air that no longer resisted. This was security at last. I sat down and looked about me and was suddenly very depressed. I thought to myself, this is just a period of adjustment. Tomorrow morning I will wake up in this first-class hotel suite above the discreet hum of an East Side boulevard, and I will appreciate its elegance and luxuriate in its comforts, and know that I have arrived at our American plan of Olympus. Tomorrow morning when I look up at the green satin sofa, I will fall in love with it. It is only temporarily that the green satin looks like slime on stagnant water. But in the morning, the inoffensive little sofa looked more revolting than the night before, and I was already getting too fat for the $125 suit which a fashionable acquaintance had selected for me. In the suite, things began to break accidentally. An arm came off the sofa, cigarette burns appeared on the polished surface of the furniture, windows were left open, and a rainstorm flooded the suite. But the maid always put it straight, and the patience of the management was inexhaustible. Late parties could not offend them seriously. Nothing short of a demolition bomb seemed to bother my neighbors. I lived on room service, but in this too there was a disenchantment. Sometime between the moment when I ordered dinner over the phone and when it was rolled into my living room like a corpse on a rubber-wheeled table, I lost all interest in it. Once I ordered a sirloin steak and a chocolate sundae, but everything was so cunningly disguised on the table that I mistook the chocolate sauce for gravy and poured it over the sirloin steak. Of course, all this was the more trivial aspect of a spiritual dislocation that began to manifest itself in far more disturbing ways. I soon found myself becoming indifferent to people. A well of cynicism rose in me. Conversations all sounded as if they had been recorded years ago and were being played back on a turntable. Sincerity and kindliness seemed to have gone out of my friends' voices. I suspected them of hypocrisy. I stopped calling them, stopped seeing them. I was impatient of what I took to be innate flattery. I got so sick of hearing people say, "I loved your play," that I could not thank you any more. I choked on the words and turned rudely away from the usually sincere person. I no longer felt any pride in the play itself, but began to dislike it, probably because I felt too lifeless inside ever to create another. I was walking around dead in my shoes, and I knew it, but there were no friends I knew or trusted sufficiently at that time to take them aside and tell them what was the matter. This curious condition persisted about 3 months, till late spring, when I decided to have another eye operation, mainly because of the excuse it gave me to withdraw from the world behind a gauze mask. It was my 4th eye operation, and perhaps I should explain that I had been afflicted for about 5 years with a cataract on my left eye, which required a series of needling operations and finally an operation on the muscle of the eye. The eye is still in my head, so much for that. Well, the gauze mask served a purpose. While I was resting in the hospital, the friends whom I had neglected or affronted in one way or another began to call on me, and now that I was in pain and darkness, their voices seemed to have changed, or rather that unpleasant mutation which I had suspected earlier in the season had now disappeared, and they sounded now as they had used to sound in the lamented days of my obscurity. Once more, they were sincere and kindly voices with the ring of truth in them, and that quality of understanding for which I had originally sought them out. As far as my physical vision was concerned, this last operation was only relatively successful, although it left me with an apparently clear black pupil in the right position, or nearly so. But in another, figurative way, it had served a much deeper purpose. When the gauze mask was removed, I found myself in a readjusted world. I checked out of the handsome suite at the first-class hotel, packed my papers and a few incidental belongings, and left for Mexico, an elemental country where you can quickly forget the false dignities and conceits imposed by success. A country where vagrants, innocent as children, curled up to sleep on the pavements, and human voices, especially when their language is not familiar to the ear, are soft as birds. My public self, that artifice of mirrors, did not exist here, and so my natural being was resumed. Then, as a final act of restoration, I settled for a while at Chapala to work on a play called The Poker Night, which later became A Streetcar Named Desire. It is only in this work that an artist can find reality and satisfaction, for the actual world is less intense than the world of his invention and consequently his life, without recourse to violent disorder, does not seem very substantial. The right condition for him is that in which his work is not only convenient but unavoidable. For me, a convenient place to work is a remote place among strangers where there is good swimming. But life should require a certain minimal effort. You should not have too many people waiting on you. You should have to do most things for yourself. Hotel service is embarrassing. Maids, waiters, bellhops, porters, and so forth are the most embarrassing people in the world, for they continually remind you of inequities which we accept as the proper thing. The sight of an ancient woman gasping and wheezing as she drags a heavy pail of water down a hotel corridor to mop up the mess of some drunken, overprivileged guest is one that sickens and weighs upon the heart and withers it with shame for this world in which it is not only tolerated but regarded as proof positive that the wheels of democracy are functioning as they should, without interference from above or below. Nobody should have to clean up anybody else's mess in this world. It is terribly bad for both parties, but probably worse for the one receiving the service. I have been corrupted as much as anyone else by the vast number of menial services which our society has grown to expect and depend on. We should do for ourselves, or let the machines do for us, the glorious technology that is supposed to be the new light of the world. We are like a man who has brought up a great amount of equipment for a camping trip, who has the canoe and the tent and the fishing lines and the axe and the guns, the mackinaw and the blankets, but who now, when all the preparations and the provisions are piled expertly together, is suddenly too timid to set out on a journey, but remains where he was yesterday and the day before and the day before that, looking suspiciously through white lace curtains at the clear sky he distrusts. Our great technology is a God-given chance for adventure and for progress which we are afraid to attempt. Our ideas and our ideals remain exactly what they were and where they were 3 centuries ago. No, I beg your pardon. It is no longer safe for a man even to declare them. This is a long excursion from a small theme into a large one which I did not intend to make. So let me go back to what I was saying before. This is an oversimplification. One does not escape that easily from the seduction of a fatigued way of life. You cannot arbitrarily say to yourself, I will now continue my life as it was before this thing. Success happened to me, but once you fully apprehend the vacuity of a life without struggle, you are equipped with the basic means of salvation. Once you know this is true, that the heart of man, his body and his brain, are forged into a white-hot furnace for the purpose of conflict, the struggle of creation, and that with this conflict removed, the man is a sword cutting daisies, that not privation but luxury is the wolf at the door, and that the fangs of this wolf are all the little vanities and conceits and laxities that success is heir to. Why then, with this knowledge, you are at least in a position of knowing where danger lies. You know then that the public somebody you are when you have a name is a fiction created with mirrors, and that the only somebody worth being is the solitary and unseen you that existed from your first breath, and which is the sum of your actions, and so is constantly in a state of becoming under your own violation. And knowing these things, you can even survive the catastrophe of success. It is never altogether too late, unless you embrace the bitch goddess, as William James called her, with both arms, and find in her smothering caresses exactly what the homesick little boy in you always wanted: absolute protection and utter effortlessness. Security is kind of a death, I think, and it can only come to you in a storm of royalty checks beside a kidney-shaped pool in Beverly Hills, or anywhere at all that is removed from the conditions that you made as an artist, if that's what you are or were or intended to be. Ask anyone who has experienced the kind of success I'm talking about. What good is it? Perhaps to get an honest answer you will have to give him a shot of truth serum, but the word he will finally groan is unprintable in genteel publications. Oh gosh. Then what is good? The obsessive interest in human affairs, plus a certain amount of compassion and moral conviction, that first made the experience of living something that must be translated into pigment or music or bodily movement or poetry or prose or anything that's dynamic and expressive. That's what's good for you, if you're at all serious in your aims. William Soroyan wrote a great play on this theme, that purity of heart is the one success worth having. In the time of your life, live. That time is short, and it doesn't return again. It is slipping away while I write this and while you read it. And the monosyllable of the clock is loss, 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 unless you devote your heart to its opposition. Okay, that was the foreword of the Glass Menagerie. And so I will begin in a few minutes. Tune in.